Tonight's strong winds and unstoppable flames.
The smoke is so intense and so thick it can be seen from space and has drifted across to New Zealand.
The plume of smoke generated by the inferno covers 5.5 million square kilometres. That's the size of Europe.
People don't really understand it until you actually see it coming at you in a wall of flame.
G'day, my name's Paul BARR. I'm an enterprise architect within NTT. I've been with NTT for almost 20 years. I work within the Australian business in New South Wales. I also happen to be a firefighter for the Rural Fire Service. For so many years we've been suffering from an extreme drought within Australia. A drought so extreme that our main source of water, our dam within Sydney, had reached critically low levels. So when these fires first came through, because there was so much fuel on the ground, fuel being leaves, dead leaves, compost, trees, branches, and the soil itself, when a fire came through, it just built up so much heat, it caused more heat and more fire. It got to the point where the fires were causing their own climate and making it even worse.
During Black Summer and the months following it, we saw incredible support for our affected communities, for our emergency services workers and volunteers, and for our injured and displaced wildlife. This wasn't just from Australians, we saw amazing support from people all around the world, including many of our international colleagues from across the NTT group. At NTT, our people value giving back to the communities where we all live and work, and NTT Australia supported this in many different ways. During Black Summer, NTT supported the firefighting and emergency services volunteers we have working with us with paid emergency leave to deal with a disaster of a scale we've never faced before. We mobilised our workplace giving program to match all employee charitable donations to the Victorian Country Fire Authority, the New South Wales Rural Fire Service and WIRES, our national wildlife rescue charity. In January 2020 alone, we raised almost $90,000. Our staff also donated food, clothing and toys, packaging up care parcels for our devastated communities and contributing to animal rescue and care programs.
2019 was a very busy time for NTT. We were consolidating companies, we were changing brands, we were changing versions of our managed data centres. There were a lot more tenders coming in, a lot more client requests coming in, a lot more presentations at large conferences. NTT employees were involved in various volunteering tasks. There were people like myself in different states doing firefighting or doing emergency services and support work. Those who weren't doing emergency or frontline work were doing what they could to help the community that they were close to or help to communities they could reach out to. They were supporting towns and businesses that had been impacted by fires. Post-March, they were visiting these towns and businesses and spending money there to help businesses get back on track.
The volunteer firefighters form an essential part of the workforce fighting fires and other disasters. Last season, 90% of the firefighting was undertaken by volunteers. Without them, the destruction would have been catastrophic. Lives would have been lost and many, many more properties would have been lost. We were supported by the community. We provided, particularly in rural areas, food and water where things like that weren't easily available, and the city areas, donations and care packs which made our lives and the time that we spent at fires far more comfortable.
It's really important as part of our commitment to corporate social responsibility that we support our volunteers, so making sure that they knew we were right behind them during the Black Summer bushfires was critical. Knowing that they're not just supported by the company but also their colleagues at NTT Community is something our volunteers have told us has been really meaningful. Also, having a program like Heads, Hearts and Hands has also given everyone in our business the opportunity to contribute as well, not just our frontline volunteers. Our Employee Assistance Program has provided wellbeing support which has been crucial to so many people in our community, including our own people who were profoundly affected by last summer's bushfires.
One of the particular challenges that I found personally throughout the campaign this year was the fact that we were running 2 shifts a day from our brigade, and they were shifts of anything up to 12 hours or sometimes more. They're trying to manage fatigue, the expertise of various people, build the right teams, give everybody a fair go. Was a constant challenge, and even just to make up the numbers on the truck, because it was a very concerted campaign over a long period of time. The other aspect to that too from me as brigade captain was the sense of responsibility I felt as I would send a crew out either for a day shift, a night shift, or for a deployment of 4 or 5 days. I felt a very heavy sense of responsibility that that crew I was sending out was going to come back home to their families safely, and that weighed very heavily upon me.
I think the impact on their family is something I didn't appreciate. I thought I was doing everyone a favour, including family, by doing firefighting at night time to ensure that I'm home in the morning when they have they've woken up and life is normal. Didn't realise at the time that my eldest daughter wouldn't sleep until I came home. There are a lot of people who wanted to help fight the fires, but they couldn't. They haven't received that certification or the training, so there'll be danger to themselves and others as well. So they did the next best thing, and they were just bringing food and drinks and your lunch packs. When you're so tired, you get this lunch pack with a little note from a primary school student going, "Thank you for your service." NT's core value is together we do great things. We saw that. Together as a company, I'm so proud to work for NTT. Together as a company, we did great things. We had people delivering foodstuffs. We had people helping rescue sick animals. We had people fighting fires and looking after properties. We had people supporting firefighters and supporting family members when they had seen terrible things and needed someone to talk to.
Here as a brigade, we experienced tremendous support from our local community. We'd come back from a job and there'd be groceries piled up at the front door. We'd have little cards from families, drawings from children, all that sort of stuff. We'd have people stop us in the street, or people just pull up at the station and come in and shake our hands. The support that we had was just fantastic, and it was actually something that inspired us and kept us going. I couldn't speak highly enough of the support that we experienced from our local community here in Arcadia. Out on the job, we saw some things that were pretty horrifying and difficult to deal with. For me personally, coming back to the station and finding a drawing that a child had done for us to say thank you fireys or thank you for Mr. Firefighter, they were the things that spoke most to me, and they were the things that actually kept me going in spite of those, right throughout those difficult times.
I had the opportunity to go with the State Emergency Service to go and assist with those fire affected areas in eastern Victoria in a place called Gippsland and a town called Can River. So I was deployed down there for 5 days to take over from the local State Emergency Service unit who were there, and those people who run that unit were actually impacted by fire themselves. So they were busy out dealing with burnt cattle, lost fences, houses that have been lost as well. And so our job was to be there for the community in case other emergencies happened, and also to help with the relief effort for the local residents. We saw a lot of people in a very emotional state. The town I was in was cut off for around 6 weeks, cut off from being able to leave their own town to get medical support. Everything was coming to them. So we had some very anxious people wanting to just leave their town. And we support the other emergency services when events like these bushfires happen, so that their expertise can be used out on the front line fighting the fires, and we can do all the logistics and background work for them, so when they come back they can be watered and fed and their trucks refilled, etc. I'm really lucky that I work for a company like NTT that supports volunteering. Part of my employment is emergency services leave, so being a volunteer in an emergency services organisation, the company supports us when events like this happen to leave our work behind and let our colleagues who are very capable backfill for us and spend our time to help the community. So it's not something I take for granted. I do see it as a real benefit, and I'm really lucky to work for NTT.
Not everything is fires and falling trees. Sometimes it can be the wildlife itself. I'm a trained and certified snake handler. The snakes in Australia are not your friendly little pythons. These are highly venomous, really nasty, aggressive snakes. We've certainly had our fair share of encounters. Even a brown snake, second most venomous snake in the world, actually crawling into some kit and having to be fished out very gingerly, I have to say.
During the bushfires, we found it incredibly distressing to see the thousands of animals who became injured and sick. Even more sadly, many of those were orphaned baby koalas and kangaroos and possums, and they needed something to keep them warm and quiet while they healed until it was finally safe to return them to the bush. The Black Summer bushfires had a devastating impact on our wildlife, but it wasn't just the deaths and the injuries. The fires ended up destroying almost a third of their habitat. Our koala population was already endangered, and this has actually put the future of the koalas under serious threat. Wildlife rescue organisations like WIRES were under huge pressure to help, but their supplies were running out, and so there ended up being a huge call out to the community for support for the animals, and in particular for pouches for the orphaned babies. My daughters and I decided that as we couldn't fight on the front line, this was something that we'd be able to do to help from home, and my children even decided that they would donate their pocket money to help with the wildlife relief effort. What really stands out to me is that we were just one small family of an incredible number of people coming together from within our NTT family and of course the wider community to do something little to help. Many made pouches, but some gave money and others volunteered their time. And it was really incredible to see all of these people coming together to make a contribution, however small.
Well, we have to take climate change seriously. Globally, the effects of climate change have become more and more real. It's played a significant role in the Black Summer bushfires and also in the most recent fires that have devastated California. Collectively, as individuals and as corporate entities, we need to be doing what we can to reverse the impact of climate change, minimize our carbon emissions, and reduce the impact on the environment. That's something that we believe strongly in here in NTT Australia, and why we're committed to setting environmental sustainability goals and reporting against them publicly. While we certainly hope the Black Summer fires are never repeated, we know that we can mobilize our teams and respond to any crisis by helping our communities and the environment. We recently passed our environmental management system ISO 14001 annual certificate audit for our Sydney and Melbourne offices, and our commitment to reducing our individual and collective impact on the environment has not wavered. It's a position that I wholeheartedly embrace, that our people at NTT embrace, and one of the reasons why I think people want to work here and why employees are proud to work at NTT.
I was honoured to receive a Supportive Employers Program Award for our efforts from the New South Wales Rural Fire Service on behalf of NTT. Our donation has contributed to a number of initiatives the charitable organisations are driving, which includes taking immediate action to rebuild and replenish our volunteer fire brigades, which are essential to the safety and care of our communities and our unique and beautiful environment. The support of volunteers' welfare and mental health, equipment to protect the community, property and the environment, including improved connectivity and technology, and funding to support the important work that our wildlife rescue and care charities are doing, especially koala care, management and research. I would like to thank all employees for their donations and recognise the organisations we donated to, Wildlife Rescue and the Rural Fire Services. We'd like to thank our employees who volunteer for the Rural Fire Service and State Emergency Services who fought to keep our communities safe. And finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank NTT Limited, NTT Holdings and all employees for their contributions in the many and varied ways.
I'm proud to work with NTT because, as I said before, we do great things. And NTT showed the speed, the execution and the togetherness. NTT has still been striving forward with programs, things like regeneration of trees, replanting of trees programs, the ISO certification that Mark Miller spoke about before in regards to climate and environmental protection and our ongoing task to ensure that happens.